reminding everyone at the plenary session that climate change is one of the major issues that all of us need to come together and try and solve. And when it comes to climate change, for many years, it's really felt as if the entire planet is heading for a precipice and no one's really doing anything much about it. They're trying to, their voices out there in the wilderness, but no one's stopping the planet from going over. Now, in recent times, it's started to feel that efforts are being made to try and actually do something that can prevent us from going over the precipice. Is it going to be enough? Well, that's what we are really here to discuss. And more importantly, what can all of us do about it? As countries, what can we do? As companies and organizations, what can we do? As individuals, what is it that we can do? Because at the end of it, this is one thing that we're all in it together in one form or the other. And I have to tell you, I have not seen a climate panel quite like this in a long time. Anybody who's really influential in the climate movement is here with us. And I'm going to start off by welcoming perhaps the face of the climate crisis and what we need to do about it. Not the face of the climate crisis, but what we should do to fix the climate crisis. Vice President Al Gore, it's a pleasure and a privilege, sir, to have you with us. Jennifer Morgan of Greenpeace, another organization that has done so much work on it. Thomas Bubel of AXA, somebody who's actually, as an organization, shown you can withdraw funding from polluting companies, and is that the way really to go forward? Anand Mahindra, of course, a top industrialist, also is going to be the co-chair of the Climate Action Summit, and we're going to see what possibly could happen there. Sadat Khan, it's great to have you with us as well as a climate change activist. You've fought against coal plants and had a lot to do to actually reverse coal plants from coming up in Bangladesh. So it's a pleasure to have you with us. And we've got a large number of really prominent people in the audience as well I'm going to go to. Not least, Jay Inslee, Governor of Washington, perhaps one of the most influential politicians in the United States, who is really doing all he possibly can to try and reverse the trajectory that the US seems to be on to some extent right now, and what the states can do to try and fix that. And let's hope you do get that carbon tax through. So thank you all so much for joining us. If I could just try and set the stage for what we should try and do. Let's start off by trying to establish where exactly are we? Where are we headed to? Is it 3.2% degrees? Is that what we are trying to do about it? What's the state of play? And then what can all of us do to try and fix it? Finally, what might technology be able to do? Will we get a technological solution before we can actually fix it? You know, maybe an AI coming in to fix it, but it could be something more mundane than that as well. Vice President Gore, why don't I start off with you? Where are we?
Well, thank you, Vikram. That was a great setup. And before I answer your question, I want to underscore your recognition of Governor Jay Inslee from the state of Washington. Not to be too U.S.-centric, but you know, our president's going to speak here tomorrow, and I have no comment on that. But I will say this, that several governors of our largest states, hundreds of cities, and thousands of U.S. businesses are now ensuring that the U.S. will not only meet but exceed the commitments it made under the Paris Agreement. And Jay Inslee has been a preeminent leader in that movement, and he's the only governor who came over to this meeting to hold the flag and say we're still in. So I wanted to thank him for that. And the U.S., by the way, can't legally leave the Paris Agreement until the day after the next presidential election anyway, legally. And if there's a new president, excuse me a moment, there will be a new president could give 30 days notice and we will be back in the agreement. So where are we? From the beginning of this struggle to solve the climate crisis and the steadily increasing awareness that this is an existential threat to the survival of human civilization, the challenge has been that the maximum that's politically feasible has fallen well short of the minimum that will really solve the crisis. So what do you do in that condition? You keep trying and you expand the limits of what is politically feasible. The Paris Agreement was a fantastic and historic breakthrough. Every nation in the world committed to go to net zero global warming pollution by mid-century. It's fantastic. But you add up all the specific commitments of all the nations that agreed, it still falls short of what's necessary to stay below 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees, the aspirational goal. However, and this is the real purpose for this step-up meeting, the Paris Agreement requires every nation that signed it to make a comprehensive review of their commitments every 5 years. That process for 2020 starts this year. And that's why the World Economic Forum is putting such a focus on it. Because the cost reduction curves, we'll talk about technology toward the end of this session, but we have a lot going for us. The technologists and the business leaders are finding that there are amazing advances in solar energy and wind energy, batteries, electric vehicles, efficiency. So we can increase the commitments. But what's needed is the political will to confront the naysayers, to confront the foot draggers, the carbon special interests that want to slow the process down, and exercise the political will to really increase these commitments. And that has to start this year for 2020. And it's worth remembering that political will is itself a renewable resource.
Right. I'm just trying to figure out the probabilities of it. When Donald Trump does speak at Davos, what's the possibility that he will say the U.S. is going to do more on climate change? And
0.
Why was I hoping for something different? But okay, fine. No,
But a famous economist in the U.S. in the last century, Rudy Dornbush, said something very wise. He said, things take longer to happen than you think they will. And then they happen much faster than you thought they could. All the social revolutions, Mahatma Gandhi's revolution, Martin Luther King's revolution, you could go through the list. They've all seemed so slow and painfully slow until consciousness changed and people resolved the complexity into a simple choice between what's right and what's wrong. And then the change happened. The survival of our civilization is at stake here. And people are becoming aware of it. And the change is now beginning to accelerate. But we have to translate it into political change.
All right. Jennifer, would you be more optimistic today than you were 5 years ago, or less optimistic?
Oh, a bit of both, I have to say. I'm more optimistic because I think we are seeing a step up to some extent, and because I think the Paris Agreement and this ratchet mechanism that Vice President Gore is talking about is fundamental and gives us the ability to go to that zero carbon economy we need to go to. But I'm less optimistic when I look at the disruption. The disruption is also a positive and a negative, because I think disruption is actually the new business as usual on climate. Because if you really look at the disruption that's happening through the different extreme weather events that have happened around the world, I mean, how many of us are living in places that are being impacted? The science that's coming in on attribution of those events much more clearly and tying that. The societal disruption that's coming in on a positive side, and students, organizations taking companies and governments to court. That, I think, makes me optimistic. The disruption on technology with the cost driving. I mean, who would have thought even 5 years ago that you would have the phasing out of the internal combustion engine? I mean, who here would have thought that? And now we're at that point. And the economic one, too. So, you know, lots of disruption, and I think that's the opportunity. But it has to be seen.
And are the extreme climate events that we are seeing, are they clearly being linked to the problems that we've been talking about of climate change?
Yes.
Because there's still a lot of climate change deniers, not least the President of the United States, but there are others.
Yeah, there's not. I think that's a thing we just put in the corner, because I think the vast majority of scientists around the world understand this, and I think
only 99%.
Yeah, 99%. Thank you, Vice President. I think the thing to know about the science, which is very important right now, I think also for people here at Davos, is work that's happening at Oxford University, Union of Concerned Scientists, that is looking at attribution and the link. They are, the science has just gotten much more sophisticated, and the ability to link actually those events with, almost like if you're a baseball player and you're taking steroids, right? Those events, that's what's happening right now, and the science is solid there. So if I were a corporation, I would be looking at that body of knowledge.
All right, Anand Mahindra, where are we at? When you go to the Climate Action Summit, when you're going to be talking out there and saying what is it that needs to be done, how bad is the crisis, and to what extent is a step up needed?
You know, my definition of an impossible task is being asked to summarize where are we after Vice President Gore. You know, I mean, he is the first and the last word on this, so I don't want to answer the question, where are we? He just did that. But you asked me what I'm going to do, especially at the Global Climate Action Summit. My main task as a crude capitalist is to dismiss two myths. The first myth is that there is a trade-off between choosing to do something to improve climate and your growth or your profits. Everything that our group of companies have done to try and improve energy or to reduce greenhouse gases has actually given us a return. In the last 5 years, for example, we've saved 58 million kilowatt hours of energy, which could, fire up 15,000 homes in India. But that saved us money. We've turned water positive in our group. We've saved 36% of the water that we use as opposed to since 1912. But that's not because we did it as good Samaritans. That's brought us profits. So we have to dispel the fact that there's a trade-off, that you're ticking a box off for CSR. And the second myth I want to dispel, again, related to the fact that this is not ticking the box, I think we have to keep drumming the message that climate change is, in fact, the next century's biggest financial and business opportunity. Why are we constantly asked, what are you going to do? What is your do-gooder? What will you do to keep up AXA's finance to you? We don't need that stick. There is going to be a $6 trillion opportunity over the next 2 decades. When technology changes, just as it did when it first moved from the buggy to the car, whole new ecosystems fill up. New appliances, retrofitting of technology, leveraging new technology. I mean, you can wake up one morning and suddenly somebody tells you there's an entirely new universe of business opportunity. Why on earth are we talking about this as a compulsion or a burden? That's the message I want to give wearing the hat I have.
So, Risalat, when you're looking at that, when you're talking about the trade-off, so is that one change that has started to come when we are looking at where we are on this right now? That countries are also starting to recognize that it's not entirely a trade-off. He's talking about the trade-off for a corporation. For a country also, it's not entirely a trade-off. You can do something about climate change without necessarily derailing development. I mean, in Bangladesh, for example, is that realization coming? One of the countries that might be the worst affected if you actually do have, a rise in sea levels.
Yeah, thank you, Vikram, and great to be here. And I appreciate the forum for giving youth an opportunity to engage in this debate. So for countries like Bangladesh, it is very important because, as you know, like one of the most repeated statements is Bangladesh is the most vulnerable country to climate change. And if you look at the sea level rise kind of figures, the estimates that scientists have put out, you see that there's still significant levels of uncertainty there, but between 20% to 1/3 of the country could go underwater. And we're a country that has over 160 million people. So, so just in terms of that reality, that cannot be contradicted. Like that is the reality that we live in. Now, you talked about technology, and I do think that that technological shift is happening, where now countries like Bangladesh, countries that still have challenges to do with energy access, they can actually leapfrog these previous technologies of the previous century and actually go on to new technologies like renewable energy, solar, wind, and so on, and really address this challenge head on. Because when you're making investment decisions about these coal power plants and so on, you're essentially making decisions for the next 50 years. These are infrastructural decisions. So, and right now, all over the world, coal power plants are being shut off. So what does that tell us about whether this is a good decision or not?
So the technology now exists to enable countries to realize you don't have to necessarily trade it off. No one's saying live without electricity. Just have electricity of a slightly different type, not coal-fired, but renewable. Use solar instead of something else. Have electric vehicles instead of, the internal combustion engine. That's an interesting point. Obviously, I just want to come to the extreme weather events to some extent, because when we're talking about the trade-offs and where we are, how do you look at that? Because for insurance companies, this must be increasingly becoming a nightmare. As you have more and more extreme weather events, look at all that's happened in the United States alone in the last some years. And unkind people were saying it's karma to some extent, which is really unkind. But even here at Davos, it's the worst snowfall that you've seen in a long period of time. Is this something you're factoring into all your calculations, that climate change is starting to have its impact in extreme weather events, and it's going to really affect the insurance companies as much as anyone else?
No, you're absolutely right. Today, it's already a reality that this is impacting, and it makes our pricing more and more difficult. But today, it's still insurable. I think if you go much further to 2020, 2030, we can clearly say that a scenario between 3 and 4 degrees is not insurable anymore. Your basement shop in New York, your basement shop in Mumbai will at this point not be insurable anymore. And this is something we need to figure in. And to my mind, we have done a lot, but the glass is only half full and not half empty, but only half full. We really need to go further. And to my mind, it really needs both sides. It needs the governments to really take a very proactive attitude when it comes to investing into new technologies. So as an insurer, for example, I am looking at things in a long-term perspective, 20, 30 years. But today I don't have enough incentives from a regulatory perspective to really go into infrastructure. I would love to do more. At the same time, I do believe that businesses need to see it, as you said earlier, as a business opportunity. And in my case, it's pretty simple. I have a good return potentially from investing into coal. I have lots of claims of having all these consequences. If you make this equation, you'll end up with a negative result. So for us, it was very clear, and I used it as a business opportunity. Having a little bit less on the investment pays out significantly on having less claim, is being able to provide insurance still. And I would really like this to penetrate into other business areas. And when we put out the first chunk of green investments of 3 billion, we calculate this over 6 years because we thought nobody would take it. It was gone within 2 years. So the demand is there.
Vikram, I would like to commend Thomas and AXA from divesting all of their coal investments. That's genuine leadership in the business community. Thank you. You had previously divested from oil sands. Significantly, the largest sovereign national wealth fund in the world, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, whose income came entirely from oil and gas in the North Sea, has just announced that it is 100% divesting from all oil and gas assets. Why? Thomas gave us one of the reasons. But these carbon assets are now becoming stranded. You remember the subprime mortgage crisis. So many millions of mortgages that were actually worthless, but people didn't realize it quickly enough. And it caused the Great Recession. Now we have a subprime carbon bubble. 2/3 of the existing carbon reserves cannot be burned, but yet they're marked to market on the books of sovereigns and multinationals. At what point will they realize they're actually worthless? I don't know when that realization will occur, but it will, and it will occur within the time span relevant to long-term investors. But if I may say one more thing, Anand is one of the co-sponsors of the crucially important California Summit meeting in September. I would like to challenge you gently, Anand. You have done so much. Can you lead the way with business at that California Summit by announcing some higher aspiration and commitment?
I have to tell you, Vikram, in a sense, Vice President and I have set you up a little bit. We're going to use this panel that you're doing to actually issue a call to action. Thank you, Vice President. Vice President is referring to the Global Climate Action Summit in September, led by Jerry Brown, the governor of California. I'm a co-chair. And I have been requested and very willingly acceded to issue a call to action. First, to my own colleagues and my company, I commit that all Mahindra Group companies, all of us in our group, every company will commit to the Paris Agreement. What I'd also like to say is that all of our companies will commit to the Science-Based Targets Initiative. If you don't know about that, look it up. But I think it's the one way in which every company in the world can find a roadmap, a very quantitative roadmap in how they're going to contribute to meeting the Paris goals and to getting climate change to be restricted to 2% global warming. There are metrics, there are methodologies. 300 companies have committed. 2 out of my own group companies, the highest emitters, have already committed. I would like to issue a call to action that let's all work on this so that by the time we reach the summit, 500 companies will have committed. I hope that meets your approval. Thank you.
Fantastic leadership. Thank you.
And sorry for setting you up with
No, that's fine. This is a good problem to have. Now, can I get Anybody else feel free? Not just on the panel. Anyone in the audience wants to make commitments?
If I may build on that call to action, I just want to take a step back for a second on the business case that was made, and just ask a question first to the audience and everyone here. Raise your hands if you have children.
Grandchildren, too.
Okay, so that's even better. So I saw the majority of hands go up here at Davos. And I just want to take a step back and frame the situation that we're in a bigger picture. Yeah. Throughout my life, I'm 27 right now. I'm turning 28 very soon. Essentially, the previous generation of decision makers have failed us, have failed our generation. And I'm not sugarcoating this. I think you have already failed us through the inaction from the previous generation. And the next 3 years, from 2018 to 2020, that's the time that you have to redeem yourselves. That is the message to the previous generation of decision makers. Because Mission 2020, which is an initiative by Christiana Figueres, who is the head of the UNFCCC, has those science-based targets that we need to really bend the curve in the next 3 years. And
3 years to redeem yourself. It's quite a powerful challenge. Okay, so I'm going to come to the countries, but seeing as we've started off on the businesses, let's just look at that. That's sort of a challenge. Is it something that you think, Jennifer, could actually spread? More and more companies coming out, groups coming out, insurance companies coming. There's a We Mean Business coalition is already there, and a large number of companies are coming up and joining it. Is this one of the ways that you see that challenge can actually be met?
Yes.
And the redemption that Risadat was talking about?
If the action comes quickly. That's the key. That's the key. And that it's at scale. Because I think what we're seeing is a lot of good action, a lot of good words, but it can't be incremental anymore. That's the thing. So this disruption, and I completely agree with you, I feel like there's this space that's opened up for economic development, for people that can be stepped into by companies and by governments, but by companies particularly, for your shareholders, but also more importantly, from my perspective, for the planet. So it has to be big enough. And that's what we'll look at to see, okay, great to see the momentum. But, we just came from a meeting about deforestation. Last year, an area the size of New Zealand was deforested, right? We're not winning on deforestation. And so the Tropical Forest Alliance needs to step it up, and they need to go big as well. So I think it's possible. We welcome it. We want to see the big actions. And I think, I also just quickly, I want to just say on the impact side of things, the insurance part is very important, and to see what's insured losses and uninsured losses. Yeah. The piece that I think is also a big power shift, if you look at what New York did last week, right? They basically are saying, we can't pay for these impacts that come from Hurricane Sandy. Our people in New York can't pay for that. Who's going to pay for that? They have issued a court case against 5 oil companies to say, based on that attribution science, we can't pay for that. They should pay for that. And that's that push and pull, right? That needs to go on, and the responsibility that I think is expected and needed from young people, from everybody. So yes, on big action, but it's real. It's really real now.
Just to add a number to what you're saying, this protection gap between what is insured and what is not insured is 100 billion. And it's mostly on the shoulders of the states, as you say.
And just to build on the comment on the young people, Vice President Gore mentioned the divestment that has happened. I just want to point out that divestment was a movement that started only a few years ago. It was only 5 or 6 years ago, and it started largely because of students mobilizing across college campuses. And I see youth having a fundamental role. I believe they have 3 components. Like, they have a very clear moral clarity of this crisis for our generation. They have the disruptive energy to drive this change, and they can also bring the technological savvy to share knowledge and build these networks. And that's what has led to big actions to evolve over time. And youth have shown leadership.
And you've shown that, for example, in your campaign against a coal plant in Bangladesh, which you were able to actually get stopped.
No, unfortunately not. You're referring to the Rampal coal plant that's being built next to the
But I thought it is. Is there any chance it is? Because we are still hearing from the authorities that they may or may not be.
So right now, construction is actually going on. And I just want to take this moment to highlight the link, because this is being seen in NDTV by Indians across the world. I just want to highlight the connection of the Rampal coal plant to India. Well, firstly, Sundarban is a heritage. It's a World Heritage Site. It's the largest mangrove forest in the world, and it's shared by Bangladesh and India. And if you haven't been there, it's an incredible place. It's a spiritual connection that you feel. And it's been driven at the highest levels from India. At the beginning, it was a 50-50 coalition between the NTPC, the National Thermal Power Corporation, and the Bangladesh Power Development Board. Then came on the engineering and procurement contract was then signed by Bharat Heavy Electricals. And then came on Exim Bank, providing $2 billion of funding to underwrite the project. And finally, now we're hearing that Coal India is in line to supply 4 million tons of coal annually. And we're hearing that India is potentially looking at Bangladesh as a market for lower quality polluting coal. So that's a very difficult position to be in for Bangladesh. And I just want to highlight and make an appeal to Indians, civil society, businesses, as well as the Indian leader.
So you shouldn't shift pollution from one country to the other. I think that's an important point.